Welcome to Brazen Education with Educator Barnes, a podcast with a focus on speaking your truth, being transparent to help others, and having no shame about it. Because we can't move forward until the truth is known.
Well, welcome back to Brazen Education. This is our first episode of 2023, and we hope that you guys enjoy this conversation because I truly believe you're in for a treat. So the guest I have today is Justine Gonzalez. She is an educator, an author, the founder of EducatorAide. And I asked her to be a guest on my show based on a conversation we had. Many times when I talk to Justine, she talks about being a third culture kid. And at first, when she would say it, I didn't really ask any follow-up questions. I would just let her talk. And then one day I was like, what does that mean? Like, you keep, like, I think, like, I'm like a former English teacher, so I understand context clues. So I had a sense of what that meant. But when she really dove into, like, what that means, I'm like, this is a conversation that we need to have. And also, like, Justine isn't alone. She isn't the only person that's in that bucket. And then when I think about students, I feel that when we talk about serving all of our learners, there's still buckets that we don't talk about. And I think third culture kids, we don't talk about. And then those third culture kids grow up to be third culture adults. So what does that look like? And then navigating life.
Help us! Help!
The show. And my first question is, like, what is a third culture kid? Like, explain it to us.
So okay, so here's the thing about this. First of all, I'm a super nerd. I love books. So one of the things I always say jokingly, I just got the opportunity to buy my first home with my longtime partner, Thaddeus. And I was like, I can purge a lot of things. I will get rid of everything. But my 15 to 20 boxes of books are like my security blanket. But I'm saying that to say, I'm currently researching and studying cultural psychology and cultural neuroscience. This has been not just, I think, and I didn't realize this until even I started my own business. Like, this has actually been my life story, not just, oh, I'm passionate about culture and researching it. So now it's starting to come together. I'm grateful because I've met people like you, Shantae, along the way who were on this journey of trying to find out, who are we? What's our identity? How do you marry that with different things? So all that to say, over my time of research, when I started first hearing that term, probably about 5-6 years ago, the actual definition, a lot of times when you look it up, goes all the way back to, like, I want to say the 40s and 50s. And it was when you had a bunch of expats after World War II that were in different parts of the world, all over the place. And so you had people who might have gotten married, like, for example, a person from Switzerland might have met somebody who was from Portugal, and then they're actually deployed someplace else, maybe in the Middle East somewhere. And so you're being raised in a totally different culture. So there's a very technical term when it comes to a third culture kid, but there's also a more evolved terminology too, that if you look it up, and this is what I refer to with myself, and that is when, again, you're still being raised in kind of this new third culture, but both of your parents come from very different backgrounds, not even necessarily race, but very different ethnic backgrounds, language, perhaps different skin tone as well. In my parents' situation, it was that way. But then also, for me, it was, Puerto Rican dad's side, Amish Mennonite mother's side. And then but then they created too, right? We had our own, we were very in the church. So then you have these Gonzalez kids popping up at First Baptist Church. So when I think of third culture kid, it's a little bit of all of it. And I think it's become more evolved, and it's had to, because, like you said, I am not an anomaly. I think I was a bit of an anomaly where I grew up and during the time I grew up there. But I just think that there's more and more people with my story now, especially students in schools.
So what I don't know how many people even know, like, the difference between Amish and Mennonite and really what that is, because I think a lot of times there's a lot of stereotypical like what that is, but we're like right now I'm in Indiana, and we know there's the Amish community in Indiana. You go places, you see people based on how they're dressed, you assume that they're Amish, but there's also like the Mennonite community as well. So could you explain to us a little bit about like, I guess, what has been your experience? Because just like any other group, we can't paint a broad brush, but
No.
your community, your mom's community, what was that like?
Yeah, so I'll start with my mom's side because both sides are fascinating lineages. Lots of surprise stories as I've become a very amateur genealogist for my family. But also just fascinating. So a lot of the Amish movement actually was birthed out of Switzerland, what was originally Switzerland. And on that side, you saw the evolution of different religious trends. So the interesting thing too about the Amish tradition, it's very cultural, but it's technically a religion. So there's a lot of Amish even in the United States who they might speak Pennsylvania Dutch, but then when you go to church, it's the bishop is teaching in all German because those are the origins even before it was called Germany or Switzerland. Those are the vast origins. And then on that side as well, a lot of my bloodlines go back to Ashkenazi Jew, and different those groups even extending into the Middle East. So there you see them once you go back, right? You see the migration patterns. But long story short, both of my grandparents on my mom's side, they were born and raised Amish their whole lives until they left when they were teenagers. And many people may have seen that on shows or yes, Rumspringa is a thing. So they left. They got married. So funny thing about my grandma, she is still living. Her name's Katie Troyer. But she wanted to go. She grew up in different states throughout period, but I grew up in Northern Indiana. And that is where they eventually my mom was born and raised in Northern Indiana. So anyways, she wanted to go to the big city of Indianapolis. And my great grandpa would not allow her to. Like she had dreams of going to college, which was very different for women in that time period. But she ended up staying put. She married my grandpa, but they left the church, and then they slowly got out of then the Mennonite tradition as well. But I very much grew up knowing about the history of that family, and then just on that one side alone, and this is to kind of put you in the psychological mindset from the time you're born as a third culture kid. In the summers when we would visit or have big family reunions, you're going to one person's farmhouse with like 400 relatives and you know you're related to them, but you're also showing up and you're called English. So if you're not dressed Amish, you're called English. And so from even that time, and right, we're a lot of us are the same skin tone. But from that time, you're going someplace as a child and they want to know why our last name's Gonzalez. Like, and this is also because it's a very closed community. I call it a cult. A lot of my family members call it a cult. But there's also very, very beautiful things about the life that is lived in that way. You can ask me whatever questions you want because even beyond Amish, there is what's called beachy Amish. There's conservative Mennonite. There's Mennonite. There's a lot of different. Just like,
well, how does like the Mennonite come into play? Because you mentioned Amish, and I do know like if you were raised Amish and then you leave, or you
kind of
are now,
it's like a gradual release for our education folks. It's like gradual release of religion.
So like, where does like the Mennonite come into play with your family?
So that happened. My great grandparents, I actually grew up with them a lot of my life. I was very fortunate. My great grandparents on my mom's side, they were always conservative Mennonite. So even after they left the Amish church and then my grandma and grandpa left the Amish church as teenagers from their families, like they still wore coverings. Actually, there was a time period my sister was practicing conservative Mennonite and she wore coverings and she wore skirts when she was in undergrad and college. So there's a lot of that tradition because there's a verse. This is just my own personal opinion. It's not because I have a judgment against it, but there's some specific verses. And please, in the comments, if anybody sees this or knows otherwise, please correct me because I am not an expert on all things Mennonite. But when you see the bonnets or the coverings, whether it's Amish or Mennonite, there are certain guidelines. I think it's more legalistic and rule bound, but the purpose of that for the covering is there's the verse about a woman should always be in worship. And so a woman's head should be covered during worship. So that is actually where that practice comes from. Mennonites, you can drive cars. Beachy Amish, you can drive black cars, not anything fancy or flashy. And then Amish, of course, you can't drive cars. So then it becomes, right, these different things. So I think that's also been an interesting part of my story, is just being okay to embrace, like, I do come from like a long line of disruptors on both sides of my family in a way, because there's been this consistent, like, oh, I don't know if I agree with that. Let's evolve. Oh, wait, let's evolve a little bit more and understand this. So yeah, so that's my mom's side. Go ahead with any Amish questions, any Mennonite. I will say,
Well,
I'm
go
an
ahead.
excellent cook, and both sides of the family. My grandparents had a restaurant on my dad's side growing up, so I do have some good cooking skills from both sides.
And you said something really interesting about this disruptor, because you have, so I have friends who, based on the definition you shared, they're definitely third culture kids. But is when some of their cases, the other parent kind of gave up their culture and assimilated to the others. They don't do any of their practices, none of their lifestyle. They just kind of assimilate it.
Yep.
And so I feel like there's a bit of disrupting that happens when you get kids, or your family experience becomes like this third culture, when you're like, okay, I kind of like a little bit of this and a little bit of your family, and it all comes and meshes together. So with that being said, you also mentioned your other side is Puerto Rican. So how does that like enter the chat, as they say, and like what else?
Yes.
Because is it just Puerto Rican? Is there other?
There's other. So there's
Yeah.
also other. And let me explain this too, because I think this is a really great teaching point, especially for the times that we're in, because and for you all know, for everybody to know, I know you and I do a lot of similar work at times, Shantae, where we're doing cultural competence work with schools or organizations. We're doing diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, or strategic planning, those types of things, to help schools become more inclusive, to help nonprofits become more inclusive, those things. So one of the biggest things that I still hear is a lot of people, they still confuse race and ethnicity. So I'll start there.
Oh yes. Go
And this
ahead
is
and
why I
give
get
them definitions.
now you're seeing also why I get so passionate about, like, no, it is important to know these things. But it's also, I'll give some stories too of growing up and then into adulthood, because it is confusing. I mean, it is confusing for me. Like yeah, anyways, but we'll get into that. So my grandpa came from the island to Chicago when he was 16, did not speak English, from Puerto Rico. And he was one of 26 children. And so he came for better opportunities. And if you know anything about our tattered relationship and history with the United States, as well as like just how depleted the island was after the war, like World War II and stuff, and just the opportunities were very slim. So he came in the 50s. A lot of Puerto Ricans at that time, if you were coming to Chicago, you actually settled on the near south side in Inglewood. Today you find Paseo Boricua, which is the predominantly Puerto Rican neighborhood, and it's on the near west side of Chicago. But when he came, he met my grandma. And there was a bunch of questions, right, for years about my dear grandma. And so come to find out, and this is why I also researched my family, because when we grew up, it was just always Puerto Rican. My grandma had learned Spanish. She had already had a child at like 13 or 14, I believe. I think my grandpa had already had a child on the island, but they weren't, I don't even know, right? Like there's also so many things, because both sides clearly didn't practice birth control methodologies. I'm just going to say that. And actually, that is something about Amish. They don't believe in birth control. So like on both sides of my family, I have massive amount, like I'm talking thousands of cousins. Like just I went to a small university, a private university in Indiana, first generation college grad. Woohoo. I met two. There was only 3,000 people on campus. I met a second cousin from my mom's side. Met, like, we had been friends for a year. and she was at the Amish reunion. And then I met a cousin on my dad's side. Anyways, so as I'm researching, what I found is my grandma, she was actually originally from Kentucky, and she was she had a lot of Cherokee blood. So I found that in my lineage, as well as a lot of Scottish blood. So then it just becomes this whole thing, right? You go down these trails because when you're growing up, my first encounters in school were wait, I thought you're supposed to be short and brown. Like that's what my mom would get at parent conferences from my teachers. And until 6th grade, that's when you saw a huge influx. That's when a lot of the Latino migration from Central America as well as Mexico began happening. And there's stories about that too, and where my teachers would seat me and how I would be seated with people to help them. And I didn't grow up speaking Spanish. So there's also there's so many things you toil with when you're constantly you're questioned why do you look the way you do? Why do you sound the way you do? Why is your last name this? And you're constantly questioning well, wait, is there something wrong with me? Even though when I'm at home, it's just normal. It's normal to have my grandma on this side. Velige, Hoktihana, that means let's go, sit down in Dutch. Yes, that was said to me. And then hearing my grandpa, with salsa music on and, on the phone loud speaking in Spanish. So you just think that's normal, right? I think it's like anything, even if you've been through trauma, if you've been through anything in your childhood, I think until you start to get a little older and you have more experiences, if you are afforded the opportunity to live elsewhere or branch out of the community where you were born and raised or your family unit, then you don't know. You don't know because you think, well, I don't know. I don't really fit in anywhere. And so I think that has given me a lot of clarity over time. But going back to race and ethnicity, one of the biggest problems already that I encountered in elementary school by 6th grade was I had no idea what boxes I was supposed to check on the standardized tests. So, and it wasn't even as detailed for the Latino population as it is now. And that's the other thing, right? And I'll say this because I'm part Latina. So Hispanic is just a coded way of saying anyone from that, a Spanish speaking country where Spanish is the dominant language. And ethnicity is a group of people or an ethnic tribe. Race is a socio-political construct that was created to determine structure, class, and conflate it all with specifically the hierarchy being white to black and having a continuum of shades. So I became very interested in many things, many matters related to not only social justice, but I was obsessed with reading as a kid. We didn't have a lot of money to travel and stuff. So, and we would be at different families' house on both sides. But then clearly there was also tension. My dad, he's very, very dark in the summer. When he had hair, he had a fro. So there was also that my mom came from a very specific place in northern Indiana, and that was not kind or friendly typically in that area to a person of color, whether they be Black or Latino or any shade. That is not white. So there was also a lot of just, I think, misunderstanding and maybe not appreciation sometimes for one another's culture, and not because anything specific according to my mom or dad, but on top of the normal things that happen to us as humans, whether you're in marriages or have kids, it's that additional layer. It's an additional layer that for many, many years, it's still something just if you go by the misnomer of interracial, specifically interracial marriages or relationships, it's still 10% or less of the entire human population. So, but that's also because there were laws in place, right? You couldn't literally the loving, I don't even remember.
Yeah, it's a loving. Yeah.
But that was just in the late 60s. And that's also why I get so passionate talking about current day issues regarding specifically systemic racism, because I did grow up in a world with cousins literally of all races and shades. And it's still just jarring to hear in trainings when it's a good thing, because when somebody arrives at something and they're willing to say it out loud and admit it, it's great. But it's still always jarring when you hear a grown adult say, well, I've just never really been around blank, like Black people or Latino people, specifically in the US, because there's a large population of both. And I'm speaking very specifically to some of our background and roots. But yeah. So
I also would say it's like an intentional thing, because like in Indiana, we are one of the largest growing groups of multilingual people, learners, whatever you want to say. And so like you are now going out of your way, whether it is, oh, I'm not going to live in Indy, I'm going to live in the greater city of Indianapolis. You are not in Indy. Don't greater nothing. You are not in Indy. So you're moving out further and further, or you may put your kids in a school that you know is financially out of the reach of people that you are quote unquote afraid of. And so kind of like, but there was something you said that really stood out to me. You talked about couldn't figure out which box to fit in. And just from the time I have known you, you weren't ever meant to fit in the box. First of all,
like this is the whole thing. Like, and you know this about me too. Like, I am like, okay, God, this is the classic little phrase. What's the little catchphrase? Man makes plans and God laughs. It's kind of like okay, Justine, you've tried hard enough to figure out, oh, wait, how, but you also, so here's the thing, here's the blessing in all of it. And this is what I am continuing to come to realize, because even through my teaching career, even going into, I was trained at a principal pipeline program, one of the best in the country, that was founded at Harvard. I went into principalship having imposter syndrome terribly. And because then I'm questioning, wait, are they just going for it because my last name's Gonzalez? Like, and then I'm always questioning, right? Like, and to this day, oh, are you married to a Mexican? That I get asked that question a lot. Like, I'm being very candid because, well, it's brazen, it's the brazen podcast, but I'm telling the truth so that people realize, like, this is not made up. And then there's the other reality. And what I've just started doing in my trainings a number of years ago is just starting by saying, let's clear the air, because so many people ask me questions and I want to be transparent. I'm a white passing Latina. Let's just put it out there. And also, I can't stand the term person of color, because yes, technically I'm a person of color. And guess what? Technically, my soulmate, my partner in life, Thaddeus, he's a person of color. But guess what? For me, as a white passing woman, even though there's name bias I encounter, it is absolutely not the same. And I don't experience racism, but it's also not the same as the plight of my spouse, who is a Black man in America. And so to just say, oh, we're both people of color, I think that's why these conversations are important. And I know from the mistakes I've made, from my own misunderstandings, even about myself, I know how hard it is to even name and have those conversations. But it's also why the blessing in who I am is actually my superpower, because it made me hyper aware from a young age of actually understanding, typically when I go into rooms, often how I may be perceived. Excuse me. And to just be okay with, I can't change me. I'm just me. I can't, I could change my name. I've also had people who, I don't even remember what it was for, Shantae, but I showed up to an interview once and somebody told me after the fact or on a panel or something, they almost seemed disappointed, but also they thought I was Black because my first name was Justine. So I'm just being very honest, because I also know I don't expect people to understand either, because if you don't have the name stuff, I also have many friends I've met over the years who they might look very similar to me or have similar skin tone, but they're part Latina of some sort or Latino, but they have, like, the dad is Irish, right? And they don't have the name. So then it's that whole other conundrum. So my heart also goes out to anyone. Like, it's just this conundrum of you then feel like, oh, I have to choose. But then when you go even deeper, that is why also I think we are headed into an era where we all know that we want to dismantle this construct of race. And it also still exists and is still incredibly harmful to so many systems and policies and how the world just works right now, and how it functions and operates. Well, it doesn't work, but how it functions and operates right now. But I think that this is where we have to get more passionate about understanding who we are. And I think I'm going to butcher the quote, so I should look it up, but it's a Baldwin quote, a James Baldwin quote about what white people don't understand about Black people is precisely what they don't understand about themselves. And I think that's also the harm of even, yes, there's definitely white supremacy, but I also am seeing more and more, even in my trainings. I just worked with actually a corporation, a business, a chain of grocery stores about 2 weeks ago. And in their training, it was very fascinating because in schools, I've never had this happen, but in the corporate world, because this has also been a team that has done some DEI work together now for about 3 years, and we're going a little deeper. And this is my first time with them, though. They've worked with some other organizations, but they all, including the white people, right? Well, when I was growing up, this is what was important. And part of this is how I fashion and build the environment for my trainings to ask questions. But in their introductions, even, well, I grew up, my father was from Ireland, and my grandma on my mom's side was from Austria. So I know I'm Irish and Austrian. But the other thing I want to put out there and name it, especially if you are a white or white passing person, or that is how you identify in skin tone right now, then understand that that is probably a more powerful way to connect with who you are, because American isn't a race. It's not an ethnicity. It's a nationality. But that is also why I think there's a lot of searching happening. I see a lot of positive things happening with people wanting to know who they are. But I think the more, that's also something I want to name, which is this for white people to understand, or white passing people. You are from somewhere, and that matters, and those lineages matter. And it's also an awareness to understand that that's a privilege if you are able to trace your lineage back, because specifically for many African peoples in America who were enslaved, that's not necessarily a luxury that is afforded, because of so many things taken. So I want to also point that out. Like, that is even a privilege that I'm able. And that is one thing, the Amish and Mennonite keep written history. There would be a text published every year this thick, Shantae. Lineages all the way back. Well, because that's what you spend your time doing.
Well, I also think, like, it's important what you said, because sometimes when, like, first of all, when people don't understand the difference between ethnicity, race, nationality, it's like, so for example, when Irene Carr passed away, the lady that was in Flashdance, and people just couldn't figure out why. Sometimes she was playing a Latina, sometimes she appeared to be playing an African American, and then you see her parents. And if I have this right, her dad was Black but Puerto Rican, and her mom appeared white, but I believe it was Cuban. And even that, people couldn't understand why her dad was like Afro Puerto Rican. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, people don't understand. Like, if I'm born in America, I'm American. And then it's, when I think about Langston Hughes, I too am America. That's like why we want to dismantle this fake made up hierarchy of race. Because no one seems to have an issue. I won't say no one. Most people are less triggered by like the conversation of culture. So right now, people probably listen to you talk about Amish, Mennonite, nobody was triggered. You spoke in Dutch, nobody was triggered. But the moment we say like something like Black or Latina, people are like they just get all like they just get up all upset.
Settle down.
Right.
But No, and this is why, like, I've been such an observer of people since I was young. And whether it was reading books or just like, I still love people watching at the airport when I travel. I love traveling. Like, I love it. And I love studying culture. I love experiencing new things, period. And one thing I'll tell you is I think, again, you just start, it doesn't have to define you no matter what you find. It also doesn't have to define you, because the reality is I literally have, like, it's like 10% of this, 10% of this, 10%. I literally have blood from 10 different areas of the world, much of it indigenous. So there's Cherokee, there's Taino. Like, that's the other thing for Puerto Ricans. Many of us, even though there's such the colorism and racism that still exists, and for most of us, we have African Taino, which is the indigenous people of Puerto Rico, and Spanish blood. So you're also already, even if you're going around, I'm Puerto Rican, or people go, well, I'm 50% this, I'm 30% this. We're just creating then the same thing, and versus, who am I? Who does God say I am for my own belief system? What am I here to do? And how do I use this vessel, this body that I've been given, regardless of how I feel, sound, look, act at times? How do I use this and what I've been given? Because that's the thing that also is heartbreaking sometimes in trainings. And I see it the most with white men in America, is there's such an embarrassment to even then also make that admit, and I've seen it done, which is great, but geez, even to admit and get to a point to say, this is where I grew up, and I was never around a blank person until I was 25, and usually it's a Black person, right? And so let me be specific, because it's almost 9 times out of 10, when you get to a place of vulnerability, it's incredible, because right when we accept, this is a lot of Carl Rogers' theories. He was a great psychiatrist, a psychologist. He said, when I accept who I am, then I can change. And the problem, I think, for many of us who are born, our nationality is American, we haven't actually ever even accepted who we are, nor do we even know who we are. And so that's why I always also think back to that James Baldwin quote, because it's right. Like, how would I ever attempt to build empathy for your plight in life, Shantae, if I don't even know, if I don't even know crap about myself or my own lineage? If I don't care about that with me, that's pretty hard to want to do that, whether it's for students or even people I love and care about, because that's the other reality. People I love and care about, and people who loved and cared about each other, they didn't do those things, and they didn't get along, and it wasn't pretty for me or my siblings. So, like, that's the other piece of it, is that the world still can be pretty tough for people who do want to be with a person that they feel like they love, or they have big differences. And that I know a lot of people can relate to, even across, say that you're Catholic and you marry someone who's Jewish, like those are two different worlds. So that's then a whole other thing. But yeah, I could talk about all of this for days, because it is very fascinating to me. But I also think that we are at a point where we're kind of overcomplicating it, instead of just, okay, we'll just say.
So how do we make it simple? Because, like, when I think about students, because I worked with middle school for such a while, in middle school, I feel like that's the part in life where people are like, I'm trying to figure out who I am as a person. And then you got, oh my gosh, my body is physically changing, and I have hormones, and things are happening on the inside of me. I thought boys were gross, and now it's like, oh, look at this boy that I thought was just a gross person. Like, I have these feelings I can't do anything with.
Yeah.
And then you have like the who am I? So you got like the culture situation happening. It's like, I haven't fit in. Who do I become? Because I feel like whether you're a kid or adult, until you really settle on who you are as a person, you're always going to be in this kind of shape shifting mode. And so with you having this personal experience and being in the education space, how do you use your personal experience to help others, whether that's adults that are colleagues or whether that is are kids that you impact even through your work?
I feel like much of my passion and purpose continues to consistently be about self-awareness. So as much as I can go on and on about cultural neuroscience, biosocial brains, all that stuff, great. And it's great to be able to connect the dots from like, kind of a creative versus technical academic research lens. But I wouldn't even say creative, but from like an organic kind of human experience, lived story type thing. I think that I think that we spend our lives trying to fit into a box, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's trying to make a sports team and find our identity in that when you're in elementary, middle, high school. Um, Often I find that it's more based, I think, still in those age ranges. I think it's still based on what you're involved in. A lot of your identity has to do with what you're involved in or what you are able to have access to. Um, but I think it always goes back to self-awareness. And so for me, I'm finding more and more that I'm meant to show up and ask questions, because if I can ask questions and help you understand who you are better, no amount of me sharing my story, no amount of me trying to provide inroads for making a strategic plan or anything. Because if a person will go to that length for themselves to even be an observer of themselves, like one of my therapists used to say, be a little observer on your shoulder. Just kind of think of you like a little miniature you going, what's happening right now? What's going on? And I've studied enough research components too to know that in the human experience, we still all often believe, I think one of the most recent studies, it was with a bunch of executives, like CEOs, CFOs and stuff. And they polled them, and about, I think 92%, they reported from the different metrics like, yeah, I believe I'm very self-aware as a leader. And then when they actually use the psychiatric scales, it's kind of similar to like if you ever done the IATs from Harvard about race and stuff, gender, they have a bunch of different ones now. But they found that actually only about 10 to 12% of them were actually self-aware, according to psychological perceptions, understanding of others, communication styles, all of that. So I think my mission is, honestly, if I can help people better understand themselves, then I think we can all connect a little bit better often. But the thing is getting to that point of being okay to explore yourself and examine yourself. And we're often just running a rat race, and part of that is American culture too. That's not honored, it's not valued. There's many other countries I visited where rest is honored and valued. Your work is just like a support to you living life. That's what one of my friends told me. I was in Spain for a couple weeks for a friend's wedding in September, and he said that he moved from the States a couple years ago, and he has an engineering job there now, and moved from North Carolina. He said he gets 4 months off.
Oh, wow.
And when we were there, Shantae's like, okay, let me investigate now. And when we were there, right, like the lifestyle there is different. I've been there before. And you go out to dinner like 10 at night, 11 at night, because in the afternoon, places literally shut down. So you can't, for a lot of places, you can't even conduct business or even go shopping at a store, unless like a big mainstream store in a bigger city, between the hours of like 1 and 4. Because that's when you're picking up your kids from school, you're spending time, you're taking a siesta if you want. And there's many countries that practice this, right? Like it's a very, yeah, they literally said, no, we, even on weeknights, like after dinner, then we might go out dancing until like 3 or 4 in the morning. People really don't open up places until maybe 10, 11 in the morning. You work a few hours, call it good. And he said, no, here work just supports you living your best life. And I do see that. I see a lot of people awakening to that. I think that's why there's so many employee retention issues. So many people didn't want to come back after the pandemic because they're like, whoa, oh, so I can actually be probably more effective doing things from my home and I get quality time with family, which, you know, I also realized a lot of people realized I don't want to be with this person or whatever. You saw all that too happen.
It's like a give or take, because many of my own friends, they were home and then they went back, and so now they're doing like a hybrid thing, because it's like on one hand, it's nice to be like, if I have downtime, I can throw stuff in the washing machine, dry my clothes, mop the house, or just take a nap during the day, because sometimes we don't want to eat, like we really need a nap. It's been a long day. So some of them have been doing like hybrid, where they're at home or at work. But I also feel like during the pandemic, you had this boom of entrepreneurship where people were like, even if I make less money doing what I'm doing, I am living a better quality life. I'm more fulfilled. And I think that leads into retention issues, especially in education, where, and there's two buckets, because I talked to a lot of schools. There's bucket A of like, it was rough. We never really had it right to begin with. And bucket two is like, now these kids have had years and years and years of interrupted education. At what point do we say we have to like put the pedal to the metal? But in the midst of those two polar ends, you have people just burning up and burning out. So it's like, I need you to figure, because that's the other thing. Some people, I'm just going to say it, teaching is not for them. They haven't taken, as you've been talking about, figuring out who they are. So because they don't know who they are as a person, they don't really know what their purpose is. Teaching is a job to maintain their life, but it's not a job that fulfills them in their life. And so I think some of your retention issues are those people, but it's like, you need them to have that journey. So how do you, especially, I know you work with so many adults, how do you push someone to kind of get on that journey when they're just kind of, can you push someone to get on that journey?
I don't anymore. That's the truth. Tell
us why. Tell us why you don't.
Yeah, we're very similar in that, Shantae. We're very convicted about our passions, and I think that, you know, it's like any gift that you have. It can be a double-edged sword, and the reality is, even though I still am like that hopeful person. You always want the best case scenario, especially when you're no matter what you're doing, but external partnership, very different than when you're embedded in a school, you're in the thick of things. It is very different. However, I started to realize I was still having that same fight that had burnt me out in being in principal and teacher roles and putting in 13, 14-hour days, like from day one, experiencing a lot of trauma during those years, not even just related to the workplace, but outside of work in my personal life. Like, because of all those things, my coping mechanism and thank God it wasn't something more, although this can also kill. And I did have a major health scare that caused me to resign from my last role. And it was workaholism for me. And I, one of my favorite teachers, trying to remember their names. I don't even remember which one it is, but there's, I follow a lot of different teachers, especially in the spiritual world, but they basically talk about how we're all in the human experience on some level, unless we seek out our own awareness, we seek out our own healing and understanding of who we are during our time on earth. In some level, the human condition is still very addicted to suffering. And so when you think about that heaviness, my suffering was working myself into the ground and letting myself go by the wayside, because the passion is great. I wanted to live wherever I worked, and I did. Boy, I moved almost every year of my adult life until 4 years ago. So like that mission and that calling was always there from a teaching perspective for me. But over time, what you realize is no amount of you doing or saying something, if somebody doesn't want to do it, they don't want to do it. And so the thing that I'm becoming, like, I'm finding peace with along the way, because yes, I still have those shocking moments where I go, I can't even believe that I'm hearing someone say this right now when I'm facilitating something. And the other part of that is, okay, but if I stay there, I'm just condemning and judging, and I'm replicating similar harmful hierarchies of thinking, oh, well, they're over there in this particular part of their journey. I don't know anything about them. So there's, I think, a happy balance to understanding. And that's why now at this point in life, I try to be much more just open, talk as vulnerably as I can when I share. Because what I do find is, first of all, as a facilitator, there's no such thing as just because you say, this is a safe place, that makes that a safe place. Okay. That's like saying, oh, I went to a restaurant. The food was like a 1 on a scale of 1 to 10, but I just kept saying it was good in hopes that it would be good. It's not going to change it.
And I appreciate how some people have stopped saying it's a safe space. It's a brave space, because you're taking a risk. Because I can't tell you how many times I've been in so many focus groups, so many little study things, and it's like, what we say in here stays in here. But somewhere along the line, someone that wasn't in that group somehow knew what I said. So it's like, I kind of go like this. If I say something publicly, or even if I think I'm saying it privately, I always assume if this was on the front page of the newspaper, then am I still standing on this? But it also makes people not show up in their true self, because as humans, we have the needs for self-preservation. So there's some hills I'm not willing to die on. Even if I'm passionate about it, I'm like, okay, I got to keep the lights on. I got to worry about my livelihood. And this is not causing harm. I think my biggest trigger are children. So if children are involved, I'm more than likely to go down the hill. But if it's like grown-ups and their feelings, I'm like, you know what? I got something to say about you, but we're gonna keep it moving.
No, and that's what I've had to do. And I think a lot of educators can relate to this, Shantae. Many of us, we're very empathic. We're very like emotionally sensitive people. And I know from a young age, I was that way. I could tell people's energy, even if they didn't say anything. And I'm still that way. And I'm that way when I go into a room. And that helps me be a better facilitator. It helped me be a better teacher and principal at times. But then the flip side of that is, okay, that can also turn into a bit of saviorism, because we're out here going, oh, but we gotta make sure everyone understands that this isn't okay. Anti-Black racism isn't okay. And treating children that are LGBTQ this way, blah, 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 whatever the thing is.
Right.
The reality is we all have different journeys in this life. And just because your journey doesn't look like mine doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're wrong. Now, it might mean that you do have racism inside of you, or you have bad behavior because of it. And those things are hateful, and you name those things. It's when you're in a training that sometimes is often a conflation of, oh, you're saying I'm bad or I'm wrong, versus, no, I asked permission to correct something you said. Right. So it's those things too of, I get it. I get why people are sensitive. And I am also okay with being that person who, a lot of times I have been okay with being that person who, well, okay. But over time, that also wears on you too, because you want to see people grow. But again, if a person, it's just like anything. If an addict cannot admit that they need help, then they likely are not going to get it. Not by any means of intervention or any number of family members, right? So it's kind of the same thing. No amount, unless a person recognizes, oh, white supremacy still exists. Our structures in America are still inherently very oppressive to many marginalized people groups. Unless somebody actually wants to know that and accept that, or they think that that's not true, well, of course you're going to be triggered when somebody says, hey, would you mind if I corrected something you just said because it's a microaggression? I mean, like,
and then people like they add their own narrative to it, because like anytime I've been in training and I mentioned the word oppression, then I get the whole Booker T. Washington, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps.
Oh.
And then I'm like, you know what? I'm not anti Booker T. Washington. I even had the opportunity sometime back to interview one of his descendants. But we're not saying that people should just take it and just do nothing. We're not saying like give up. We're not saying that. We're saying that the American experience, that nationality piece, is not the same for some people based on these structures. And so we want you to keep trying, because there are lazy people of every race, background, nationality.
Yes! Thank you. Yeah.
There's all of that.
And
so
Look, there's also this, but I will also concur. And I think it was your last episode, or maybe you just posted about it. No, I think it was your last episode about you. You wrote about it. There are white people who their disdain is actually out of jealousy of Black folks. I'm going to specifically bring it to those matters because, again, these issues aren't going anywhere if we don't talk candidly about them. And I'm sorry, that is still front. I'm not sorry. It's still front and center in America. And I
know what you're talking about. I did
just jumping back into work right now. That is a concern that I'm seeing within myself of like, wait. So now you're not allocating any like supports for DEI work any longer? Like, and I'm over here like, oh, I think Civil War has been alive and well still. It might not look like bayonets 200 years ago, but like, I think that's why I want to keep being candid about anything like that when we talk about, and unfortunately, when you look at the historical context, and this is something I also say candidly, anytime people ask questions, because I am passionate about learning about different histories, but specifically Black American history, because it is predominantly the student populace I have taught. So this is also another reason that I have always been passionate about understanding what is actually the fabric of our country, even though I'm not Black. But you don't need to be. Like that, right. I mean, there's so many parts of American culture. It's because of African peoples who were enslaved and brought here. Again, that does not, and let me say this for anybody who is white or white passing listening, me saying that, me even saying I am pro-Black doesn't do anything to diminish me. It doesn't take away the fact that I'm still Justine Gonzalez, some crazy kid from Northern Indiana.
Like the other thing, because when I've done trainings before, and I mentioned like it's important to learn other cultures. So, like at one training, I shared transparently, like I've been trying to learn more about Latino history, more about Asian history, and then more about indigenous peoples. But in all those three categories I mentioned, there's so many divisions that are in there. So, and then I remember a participant was like, oh, we can't learn everything. And I was just like,
I've done that too.
And so I said, you know what? I'm going to die, A, with an unread booklets, because I'm always reading. But B, I'm going to die not knowing all the things. But it doesn't mean I don't make the effort to be a lifelong learner, because there's so many things. Like, do what you can. And like, when I don't know something, I will say, hey, I didn't know about that. Like, but people are even afraid to say that I don't, like, my knowledge about Amish people came from that. There was a show.
Wait, there's a couple, but it's probably the one from like TLC.
Yes.
No, Raising Up. No, it wasn't Raising Amish. It was they were
like following them, and then it was so, to me, it was just so bad.
It was inaccurate.
No. Right, because it was like clearly. So I hate any reality show that's like, yo, my mom and dad don't know. I'm like, you being recorded. Like, what is this? So a lot of it was just, I just felt like it wasn't great. It was made for TV. So it wasn't, and I had to remember, what is the purpose of this? It was for entertainment, not education. So I was okay with being like, because yes, before I have any guests on the show, I get a working knowledge of things I'm going to talk about. But I also am not afraid to be like, oh, I don't know what that is or where that is or
Right.
what, because I feel like, and you know this as a teacher, it's so powerful when you're with students and you're like, you know what, Mrs. Barnes, I don't know that. Let me get back to you. And then students see like it's okay to be like, I don't know. And it's a learning process for us all in that it also kind of humanizes like, I'm not the source of all knowledge. I'm not here to take my knowledge and cram it down into your brain. I'm trying to learn with you, which is why from year to year, even if I use some of the same lesson plans, they change based on the students in my class, which kind of circles us all the way back around to what we were talking about, because some of the students that are in classes are third culture kids. And one thing we didn't talk about, which was something that was mentioned on LinkedIn, so we need to talk about this before we wrap up. It's like you're too Latina, you're too Black. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because when you're trying to figure out who you are and you have different cultures and backgrounds, you make choices about things, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, because that's what makes you who you are. And so have you ever found yourself in a situation where maybe you're at a school and there is a Latina there, and so she's thinking she's going to have this type of relationship with you, but you're like, well, I'll kind of do this, not that. Or maybe the other way, you met somebody from the Amish Mennonite community that was having different expectations. And how do you deal with because when someone says you're too much, I feel like what they didn't say is you need to be less than that. Like,
I've actually had people tell me that verbatim, even as a consultant. I've been told you should teach it this way instead, or you should speak this way instead. I've actually specifically been given that feedback. And here's why I'm smiling about it, because this is also part of my own journey too, right? Our own learning journey in life. And one of the things, as I've rectified and healed more of just traumas that I had buried for years, different things that have happened in my life, but I would just always hand to the plow and be back at it and fill up my hours with grading papers and doing the stuff and just going hard in a different direction, because again, that is actually in my 20s specifically, that's where I found my identity. My identity then was all about, I'm a teacher, I'm an educator, I'm going to become an administrator. Like, it was wrapped up more in that. And also being a believer and follower of Christ. Like, it was wrapped up more in that. And it became more of a thing, right? Because like Indianapolis public schools, I was at a few different schools. They love putting that little H on the staff list for, we got a Hispanic on our staff. Like, so then you also live in that existence where people might perceive you as having a lot of the same privileges maybe as like this white teacher over here, but then they don't even know how to ask you who you are or about your background. So they're making assumptions. One of the first comments I got when I entered the teaching field in Indianapolis, I can't really tell who you are or what you are. But you're not quite vanilla. That was one of, like, I could tell you on replay, just like any person could probably tell you on replay, whatever their story is or whatever parts of that, the things people say.
And that says so much about that person when you are like, you're not quite vanilla. Like, you really didn't say anything about me. You actually exposed things about yourself, because like I saw this TikTok where it's like, where a white person asks a person of color, and I don't like that term, but whatever.
Well, hey,
they asked them where are they from. And they're like, oh, I'm from New Jersey, this city, this town. Well, if it's another person of color and they ask, where are you from? The person's like, oh, well, my family came from blah, blah, blah. Because they're so used to having experiences with white people where they're like, what country are you from? Instead of assuming that I'm an American first, instead of asking the right question to say, what is your heritage? What is your lineage? Not where are you from? And so I just find that like very interesting, because I've had even when I was younger and I got a perm, a whole thing about that. Oh, my parents must not be my parents because my hair doesn't look like my sister's hair. You must have a different dad. And I'm just like, because my hair is straightened now, I can't be related. I have to have like a white parent. I mean, in middle school, I had kids that thought I was biracial when my hair got permed. because of how it looked. And I'm just like, this
Wow.
is nuts. So like,
Did you go to school? Did you go to school? And I should have asked you, do you have a preference, Shantae, of Black, African American, as far as how you refer or identify yourself?
that's a good question. And I get asked, and first of all, I appreciate when people ask this question because people feel like it's a taboo question to ask. And it really is not a taboo question.
No.
I would say when I was younger, I was like, I'm African American. And now I've been saying more Black because kind of like you, I've been trying to, and like you said, it's a barrier if you're African American to go so far back in your history. But I think about like, you feel like you're part of a tribe somewhere in Africa, but you don't know which one. So as a part of me, it's like, I acknowledge that I'm African American, but I also feel like there's this other culture out there that that's my lineage that I'm a part of. So sometimes I like the term Black better because I feel like that grabs up my African Americanness, but also snatches in like my family in Africa that I don't know. Like I don't know I'm connected to them. So, but also I'm not offended by either one. But I will say, in closing, like, and you know this, so this is like to the audience. It's like if you know what a person is, like for example, I would never introduce Justine as being Hispanic or Latino. If I was just talking about her because I know that she's Puerto Rican, or, you know, or, I know what she identifies as. And I think a lot of times people like when someone says, oh, we got this person of color, I'm like, you're only talking about me. So I'm Black. I'm not a person. Even like, here's a challenge for my audience. Go look at any story about Black students and see how many times the reporter goes from Black students to kids of color, back and forth in the same article. That's supposed to be about Black kids.
Yes. In this soapbox, we didn't even go down this rabbit trail, and I know we don't have time, but the final food for thought, how about addressing also the elephant of Black and brown?
Oh,
brown is not an ethnicity or a race, and it could encompass literal thousands of different ethnicities in the world. And it's
just like, what is brown? Because when I kicked off Brazen Education in January of last year, I had on Dr. Tikku, who is from India. And so she referred to herself as a queer brown woman. And so it's interesting to me when I think about her, because she says that she's brown, and I'm not saying that she's not brown. But then a lot of times you say brown, like that could be Latino. But I also have indigenous people that I know who refer to themselves as brown. So I'm like,
on the outside, right? Like in my own lineage, that was also like eye-opening to be like, oh, I have a lot of different indigenous roots. That's awesome. I knew about the Taino, but I didn't know about the Cherokee and a few other. Like, there's also those pieces where, like you said, you start to go, oh, this is why I really do feel connected when I go certain places, you know, geographically. And that it's just a story that constantly unfolds if you choose to go into it. I'll end with this. I have a dear friend, and he always puts it this way. He's like, brown is a state of mind, just like a white supremacy mindset is a state of mind. So I'd love to see a day where we start to shift to more of that language. And when you go into a store, you're literally just matching for skin tone. If you're like buying makeup, for example, and it doesn't become, because the reality is Black, all shades, white, all shades. So, and also I just hope we get to that space, because I don't disagree with that. I think when you look at the mindset piece, that also maybe helps with lingo. If you're talking about these things, or you listen to this and you are in organizations, but it takes a little bit of the sting off of, I guess, accusatory language when you're speaking about a type of mindset, and the harm that mindset still perpetuates. But I also think there's a lot of power in people just accepting and naming who they are. So, because you can't change it. I mean, you can, but
well, I think on that note, I think that's a good place to wrap up, because we kind of have taken the identity journey. So it's like, We're going to end there knowing who
Thank
you are, naming who you are, and walking in that. So, Justine, it's been really great to have you on Brazen Education and to kick off our season for 2023. And listeners, you can follow. How can they follow you? Drop your handles and stuff.
You can follow me on a multitude of places, but probably LinkedIn. Just look up Justine Gonzalez, and then if you want to visit EducatorAide.com, we'd love for you to check out our free resources there. We're doing some rebranding and repositioning, but we've got a lot of cool free stuff coming.
A lot of resources.
Yeah,
a lot.
Yeah.
All right.
Too many. No. We're getting it together. But thank you so much. I'm just honored to be here, Shantae, always. So thank you. You're the hostess with the mostest.
Oh, thank you.
You are.